Celia. Lovely to see you.
You too. Very excited.
It's not like we just had a 15 minutes chat together.
Nice to see you again.
Well, for anyone who hasn't met you yet, obviously, I'll give you the chance to introduce yourself. Everyone, I'm very excited about this session. I'm so glad that you accepted the invitation. I know we are on for very special episodes to finish the theme of March being all about diversity and inclusivity. Obviously, the title was slightly too long for this to be displayed, but it's basically all about practical tips and communication best practices to be more inclusive at work and in life. Like, this is literally a big topic that we need to unpack for the next 30 minutes together. And without further ado, Celia, it's a pleasure to have you. Would that be okay to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Quick visual description of myself. I am a white woman with dark blonde hair, wearing glasses, and about 4 jumpers because I'm really cold. And I'm sat in a pink room with some brown furniture behind me. A quick description of myself and what it is that I do. I'm a disabled founder. I've recently also started wandering into the investment space as well, working with Ada Angels, which has just been incredible. I'm a disabled woman myself. I have a connective tissue disorder that's very weird and wonderful, and not many people know about it. But one of the main consequences of that is I'm completely tube fed, and I have sort of multiple organ failure and lots of fun things like that, which means that my life has put me in the disability bracket and being a disabled woman. And what I do is basically promote the awareness around disability and how it's impacting so many people's lives, and talk about the social and the medical model of disability and how disabled people are being disabled by society, not by the health conditions that we had. So there's so much to talk about, but that's a very brief introduction about myself. And I'm also very heavily invested in policy as well, and looking at the amendment and the implementation of new legislations that make sure disabled people have the protections that they need as people moving forward in society.
Well, definitely a lot that we need to unpack here. It's so many things, so many angles. I feel like the first probably place to start would be from your side of things, from what you've seen so far. What do you think are the major challenges that there is when it comes to being more, for example, inclusive with disabled people?
I think the biggest challenge is misconceptions. And I think we live in a world where cancel culture is rife. And I have a real bugbear with it, because I think, in certain incidences, of course, it is an opportunity to say someone's behavior has been unacceptable and they should be removed from the position that they want to be in. But the trouble with cancel culture is what it's done is it's created a space where people feel like they can't ask questions, and they're so terrified of saying the wrong thing that they decide to say nothing at all. And the impact that that's having is that people's needs and requirements as individuals, whether they're disabled or not, varies from every single person. And if we're not stimulating environments that are safe and healthy for conversation and for people to ask questions and say, what can we do for you? What accessibility requirements can we meet? Because they're scared of saying the wrong thing, that's fostering an even more negative environment. So there's a very fine balance between allowing people to make a mistake or say the wrong thing and using that as an opportunity to say, just 1 minute, we don't use language like that, or, please don't refer to me in that way, or that's not how we do things, and use that as an opportunity to educate and raise awareness. If they keep making that mistake, then obviously, take appropriate action. But if we're not fostering safe environments where people feel like as well that they can divulge their personal situation for fear of misconception or being judged or automatically disregarded, we're never going to move forward as a society and be more inclusive. And that's not just about disability, that's about all elements of intersectioning identity.
Thank you. And my apologies in advance if I'm saying the wrong thing. So feel free to interrupt me. Feel free to let me know and flag it, right? We are all here to learn. And I'm so glad you bring it up. I feel like from my experience, I've got very, very limited experience. I mean, the most that I've been exposed to is through my one-to-one conversation with my clients. Some of them are disabled, for example, and they've been sharing with me, what's been happening in the workplace for them. And I know, obviously, workplace is one thing, but there is just, society in general. And I'm glad that you pointed out when it comes to cancel culture. But I would say from your side, I know we've talked, just the two of us, about the importance, for example, to make sure that, for example, when it comes to the language that we use, we are making sure that we are inclusive in this approach. So would that be okay to unpack that for a minute?
So I think language and the language that we're using in our everyday vocabulary is so important. And I think especially over the last 10 years, all of us as individuals have become a lot more aware of the language that we're using, the words that we're using, and the impact that those can have on people. And if we look at sort of other sections of diversity movements, there's been some amazing progression around what's okay, what's not okay. If we look at sort of the female rights movement, we know what language is acceptable and what isn't. When you look at the disability sector, we're very far behind in terms of social movement, and we haven't yet caught up to a place of mass education about language that's okay and not okay. So I give you an example of Piers Morgan's whatever show it is that he does, is very, very controversial. And he was doing an interview with Kanye West. And Kanye West started swearing, and the swear words have been bleeped out. Trigger warning, I'm going to mention a word that is quite offensive. He used the R word. Not going to say it, obviously, but everybody knows what that R word is when we're talking about disability. And it wasn't bleeped, and it was put out over national television. And the disability community was sat here saying, why was it not okay for a swear word to go out, but it was okay for you to use an ableist slur and that go out and no one flag it? It be across mainstream media, it being quoted, and it was spreading across social media. And it was a prime example of the fact that we haven't reached a place yet where people understand the impact of the language that they're using around disability. And, I sit here today and say, I use language. So, for example, when people say, oh my God, that's crazy, that's mental, I was so blindsided by it. It was in my blind spot. I had no idea. Or, using the word spaz and things like that. I've done it, and I've done it in the past, but that's because that's how I learned English vocabulary. That was what was taught with to me as metaphors that we use in our everyday language. And I'm in a process, in my early 20s, trying to unlearn what I was taught that's inherent within me as English being my first language. But what we need to do is spread that message further and say, we understand what's okay about race, and obviously there are people that are still abusing that, and that's unacceptable. We understand about, there's a big conversation around gender and sexuality at the moment about respect of pronouns and things like that, and we're all learning to be more inclusive. So why is disability not in that conversation yet? And it's something that the community is really pushing for, is looking at the ableism within our language. And sometimes people say things and they think it's a compliment, and it's not. So when, I get all the time, well, you don't look disabled, I never would have guessed. My response to that is, I know you're trying to be nice and it's not coming from a negative place, but you cannot say that to people. That's not acceptable. What you're doing by saying that is inferring that disability is a cookie cutter example. And I sit here and I know what you're picturing. I know what you think disabled people, quote unquote, look like. So I always go back kind of educationally and say, 1 in 5 people are disabled. Do 1 in 5 people look like what you imagine disabled people to look like? No, they don't. There's statistical data behind the fact that what I'm saying is true and apparent. But the language we're using is so important, and people don't often realize the effects that it's having on people. And it's something that we really need to kind of raise into the public sphere of education of our children and in our workplace and, in our communities and beyond.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so glad that you're bringing this one up. And I feel like, for example, for me, I'm a very visual person. So I would say, like, I see what you mean. So next time I'm going to say that, I'm going to make sure that I keep you in mind and be like, yeah, I hear you. Can I say I hear you? Can I say it? Actually, I'm going to ask a question. Can I say I hear what you say?
This is the thing, is that because the conversation isn't large enough yet in terms of what's okay and what's not to say, I speak purely from my perspective as somebody that does not have a hearing deference, but, I respect and I listen to people's opinions, and some people like to be referred to in different ways. So as we know, if anybody's ever using the word deaf in written text, it should be spelled with a little d, a slash, and then the word deaf spelled with a capital D, because that's how you express that deafness is on a spectrum. So there's a little d and a capital D to deaf. So it's all about these kind of things, and saying, one of the expressions that's used time and time again is the voices of the disabled community need to be heard. Well, within that sentence itself, you've said 2 things which could potentially eliminate people from the conversation. And I know anybody that's engaging with this conversation now is going to go, this is going too far. Like, this is wokeism at its finest. Now we can't even say the word here. of course you can say the word here, but know your audience, and the context in which you're saying it is vital. So it's not to say we can't use the word blind in the English language, because it's part of the language and it's somebody's description. You can't ban the word because it's taking away someone's identity. But perhaps the word blind is not best used in a situation where you're describing that you've missed something or you haven't been intelligent about something. Thinking about the connotation of the word and why you've picked that particular word. So you saying, I see you and I hear you, you're talking directly to me as an individual, and yes, you are seeing and you are hearing me, so it's fine. But if I'd say, if I'd made a mistake at work or something and say, oh God, I was absolutely blindsided by it, what I've done is I've linked stupidity to the word blind, and that's not okay. So it's all about how we're linking language, and it's complicated. There's a lot of unlearning to do, and people will make mistakes and still use these phrases. But as long as we're learning from that and moving forward, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, I'm not going to lie, I'm walking on eggs in the sense that, you see, English being not my first language, I'm very mindful. First of all, there's a first layer sometimes of translation, even though after 8 years it's getting better. I feel like I'm still probably like most of people, but I feel like some people are better than this at me. I still finding my feet, for example, when it comes, like you were saying, with the sexual identities. I mean, some people just don't identify themselves in any gender, like making sure that I'm inclusive as well with this approach. So I'm so glad that we're having this conversation today, because I'm going to just take notes of everything away and be like, okay, now I can do this and that. And also I can have conversation with my clients to help them as well on their journey, if there's something that they feel like they want to be more inclusive about. We've talked about the language, and I feel like there is loads to unpack in there. Should you be bringing some form of like a summary of a dictionary of whatever it is, or you come across that, just sending my way? We need to just spread it with the word and be like, guys.
There are lots out there. What I would say is, and again, this is frustrating because people are like, okay, well, go and find the information. Be very careful about where that information is being sourced from. That if it's not being sourced from a disabled-led organization, or it's not being sourced from an organization that is a champion of disabled people and they've done effective research and consultation, recently, not naming names of any organizations, but a booklet came out about inclusivity in language and what's okay and what's not okay. So me being me, flashed forward to the disability section, and I was appalled about the language that had been selected. So one example is, and this is my opinion, people will maybe differ from me, but I would never use the language able-bodied person to describe somebody that wasn't disabled. I would just say they are not disabled, they are a non-disabled person. Because for me, saying they are they're able-bodied infers that my body isn't able in any way. Yes, there are elements about it that don't work. We're not denying that. But to infer that I have no ability, do you see what I mean about the power of language being so important? But that was a document that went out to national organizations, and the disability community is like, hang on a minute, can you stop promoting the things that we're trying to tackle? So I'd say, if anybody's going to go and seek advice or documentation like that, make sure to do research on the organization that it's coming from. Yeah.
Okay. Any specific key organization that we need to be on the lookout for, who are officially regulated to do these kinds of things?
People like the Shaw Trust and Scope, they are amazing, and they've got some amazing documentation out there. Also check out the Disability Employment Charter, that's run by about 20 disability organizations, and they have some fantastic materials. But looking for that word disabled-led is key priority, I think, because we're still in a place where people are speaking on behalf of us. And again, coming in with people saying, well, you want more awareness, and now you're saying people can't talk on behalf of you, that seems a bit counterproductive. It's to say there's a very fine difference between being an ally and being a champion, and taking my voice and not communicating effectively what I'm trying to say. And there's a very fine difference between that, I think, as well, that social movements require allyship to get where they need to be. If we look at what happened last year with Black Lives Matter and how amazing that was, all across Instagram, people were allying and posting black squares, and the movement went, from here to here very, very quickly because of that allyship. But nobody was stepping into the space of being advocates if they weren't able to do that themselves, if that makes sense. I hope I'm describing it in
Yeah.
a way that makes sense. But just being careful about that line that people sit on and not taking someone's space of communication that has that lived experience.
That's very helpful. And obviously, for anyone who's listening to this, I think Nick has joined. Hi, Nick.
Okay.
Feel free to ask, any questions. Feel free to share any thoughts that comes to mind as we're having this conversation together today. We're halfway through. I can't believe we're halfway through already. Okay. The next question I wanted to ask you is: you said it yourself. There is a very thin line, when it comes to allyship, championship versus, taking your voice away. So I'm coming from a place of feeling incredibly lucky. Sometimes I'm to be honest, I'm very I don't know how to say that, but I feel very angry that I'm from this place. So I'm trying my best, to support as many causes as I can. Again, not to take it away from anyone who's struggling, either because of their skin color or because their abilities or non-abilities, whatever it is. Hopefully, I'm not offended. I'm not offending here. Point is, if I want to be an ally, and a lot of my clients are also working in that direction, what is it that I can do to bring that to where it needs to be in terms of focus, in terms of attention, in terms of making sure you've got what you need?
I think the biggest one is about respect of intersectionality. And I feel like this is a conversation which is so missed out, is that, I sit here today as a disabled woman and know that I'm on the back foot twice because one, I'm disabled, and two, I'm a woman. But I also recognize my privileges of having grown up in a country where I'm able to access healthcare, and I recognize the privileges of where I was born. I also recognize the privileges that I have as a white woman. I also recognize the privileges that I have as a straight woman, and not have had to have gone through horrific treatment based on my sexuality or my skin color or my religion or where I was born. So I recognize the privileges that I have. But what I find frustrating is, I'm disabled, or I'm a woman, or, I've been speaking to so many of my friends that cover more of the spectrum than I do. And they're saying, I'm a Black, disabled Muslim woman, but people only want to talk about 1/4 of who I am and my identity. And there's not that crossover. And that my experiences as a disabled woman are different from, say, an example of being a disabled man, is that, I'm a disabled woman that's about to get married. If I was to be in mainstream employment, I've got, you're disabled, you're a woman anyway, you're about to get married, you're probably going to go off and have children, so I'm not going to hire. And it goes on and on and on, thinking about childcare. But it's respecting the fact that people have layers about them and people have multiple identities about them, and you cannot pigeonhole somebody into one bracket of identity. If you do that, you are straight away flagging, hi, yeah, no, I understand disability. That's great, but you really only understand it on a surface level if you think that that is all I am. And also not defining people by their disability. I'm a massive advocate, and I'll do a very quick explanation about medical and social model of disability. The medical model is arguably what we live in now, which is the barriers around us that society have put up: inaccessibility of, tech, inaccessibility of buildings, misconceptions around disability, makes our disability more difficult. You are effectively disabling us even further than we would be disabled, and I use that in inverted commas, as we are. We are trying to move society to the social model of disability, which says, I am being disabled by you, and it is your responsibility to take that burden away from me. It is not my responsibility to have to overcome your barriers. I'm not going to sit here and give you a round of applause because you've removed the inaccessibility that was on your website. You should have been doing that anyway. And that is the bare minimum. So my biggest advice would be educating yourself on the social model of disability and what that means for you as a person, and the language you are using, for example, or the way you interact with people, or maybe as a business owner, or somebody that owns property, whatever it may be. Also looking at how you identify with people and how they identify themselves, and respecting that with the utmost respect that you can, because somebody's identity is not your prerogative to touch and try and disassemble or argue with or not have respect for, if you are expecting that back.
There are so many things to unpack now. Okay, I feel like I need to go, and I just need to work on all of these things for myself first. I mean, the first thing that you said, I feel is incredibly valuable. I'm going to do a massive shortcut here, but it's something I talk a lot, even in the core of my work, which is basically who you are just as a whole, whatever this means and entail, makes you unique. And I think this is the best thing that can happen to you if you really truly own it. But I feel like taking it from your perspective from the other side, which is, well, as a person, you need to make sure that whoever you're speaking with or come in contact with, you are giving them that opportunity to be that whole person. I feel like it's a very, very important point because, like you said, it's easy to just pinpoint one thing that you want to talk about with the person and just completely dismiss the other parts. So I'm glad that you're bringing this one up because I don't think it's being talked about enough. I feel like we're in a place whereby everybody's aware that they can embrace their true self, as in from an inner place. But like you said, it needs to come from externally as well, as in it's not just about you, it's about how you interact with the others. So I'm glad that you're bringing this one up. And I feel like the other part, especially what you said, towards the back end here, I mean, I don't know even how to tackle it, but essentially I just feel like we are in 2023 now. Like, you've been on that journey for how many years? We're not gonna give away your age, But point is, I feel like there is just still so much more to go and to do. Do you feel like in that space that you've been in, you've seen things change recently, or you still feel like, oh my god, like I feel like it's, I don't know, like we're just 2 centuries away?
Yeah.
I'm just keen to have your views on that.
I have a very I freely admit I'm in my young 20s, and so I have not been around, and I've met some incredible people who've been doing this since the 60s or the 70s. And you look at people like Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, that was, a massive champion for disability when no one was doing it. And there's an amazing documentary on Channel 4 I urge anybody to watch about the history of the disability movement. It's an incredible documentary. Are we in a better place than we were 60 years ago, 70 years ago? Yes. Are we anywhere near where we need to be? No. And I think what's unfair is that so often we hear, yeah, but it's so much better than it was. Yeah, it was. But, if somebody's running a marathon and, they've raised £50,000 for it and they get to the halfway point and they go, well, I'm halfway, I've good enough, I've done it. Well, no, you haven't. You're nowhere near the end point. And my point is to say, I think people rest on their laurels and very easily turn to the argument of, these things take time. It takes time to educate. It does take time, but it shouldn't take hundreds of years. And I always say, people always say to me, well, look how long it took for the female rights movement, and arguably we're still not there. And look how long it took for women to get to the vote, and look what they had to do. And I think you're justifying how long it's taking that people are literally being discriminated against. And it's 2023, not 1903. We all look back at the women's right to vote movement, how horrific it was, and what extent people like Emmeline Pankhurst had to go to make sure that what she was saying was heard and adopted. It's 2023. Have we not learned from our mistakes in the past about taking too long with these things? Why are we moving so slowly at the same pace other social movements? To me, I can't understand the justification for it. I also do respect it takes time, and debate takes time, and legislation takes time. Are we moving at the pace we should be moving at? No. And I think what's very concerning is that there isn't that level of education in our youth. And what's been amazing is we've seen so much more inclusivity around our children and what they're learning over the last couple of years, textbooks on the syllabus changing, and sexual education programs changing to include gender and race and identity and religion. Why is disability not in there? We are actually the biggest minority in the world, yet we are the last ones to be having this conversation. And I preface that by saying that is in no way to take energy away from other social movements at all, but it's to say, why can't we be having the same amount of energy as well? Why are we left out from society? It's that point. I could talk about that for ages and go into disability history as to why we're kind of the last ones to join the conversation. But that's what's really concerning, in a very long-winded way of answering your question, is we're not moving at the pace that we should be moving at. Are we in a better position? Yes. Are we in the position we need to be in? Nowhere near.
I'm glad that you bring this one up, and I don't think it's something obviously we can solve in the next couple of minutes. I feel like just having this conversation for me was really important. So I'm glad that you're bringing everything to my attention and to anyone who's listening to this. In the final minutes that we have left, is there anything that you'd like to share that we need to keep in mind to accelerate that pace? Because like you said, we know where we need to be. So what can we do? Is there anything in particular, additionally, obviously, to everything you shared on the language, especially?
I think the biggest barrier, and whenever I've done policy research, no matter what area we're talking about, tourism, employment, leisure and activity, whatever it may be, the same thing is coming out. And one of those things is misconceptions. How people view me as a disabled person. That instantly you question how dedicated I can be to something. Instantly you question my capability to do things. Yes, I can't, we were talking about this before. I can't turn up to meetings all the time in London. Like I can't, my body will not keep up with that pace. It physically won't do it, but I can do it on my laptop. And it's that kind of automatic disregard where I feel like people are judging me automatically, and also seeing my disability as an excuse when it's not needed to be, or saying, well, she was ill or something like that, or really, really paying attention to how you automatically view disabled people. And you know what? If you view us negatively and you think, oh, she's got a long-term health condition, she's probably going to be at the doctor's quite a bit, that actually may be true. It's not to say that some of your thought processes are correct, but it's to say, instead of looking at that as a negative, say, as an employer, how can I be a bit more flexible around her appointments? How can I be a bit more flexible around people that are mothers or fathers or whatever they may be? Flexibility and looking at people as individuals, but really thinking to yourself that when I see a disabled person or I interact with somebody that I know has a disability, how am I viewing them? What am I thinking about them? It may not be coming from a negative place, but what's my automatic assumption? As soon as we cut that line about how we view disabled people externally, we're going to make real progress and it's going to shoot up. But in my opinion, that starts with education and awareness as young as possible. And I don't currently believe that that's happening enough. Yeah.
Okay, so let's make it happen more.
It was a very long-winded way of saying, think about how you view people in very short headline font.
Yeah, but I mean, again, like all of us have to chip in, I feel, on this one, like you said. So anyone who's listening to this, any future conversation that you might be having, or you might be hearing something that is just not inclusive in the way it is, just feel free to respectfully make sure that you leave the person aware that this is just not the right way of just referring to things now that we're in 2023 and there's so much more to go. Celia, I just want to say thank you so much. I feel like I need to just rewatch this replay and pause and make sure that I grab all of the resources, and we'll make sure that we share anything that you've mentioned as well, along with the comments for anyone who wants to refer this further. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And if anybody has any questions that they think might be awkward questions that they don't want to put in the public sphere and they want to ask privately and say, I'm using this language, is this okay? Please message me and I'll be really happy to help anybody and have a chat with anybody about anything.
I love it. Reach out to Celia if you've got anything. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye, Celia.